A lie becomes most dangerous when it is spoken in a voice you have trusted for years. Adrian DeLuca sat at the head of the black walnut table while rain dragged silver lines down the windows of his Boston estate. At 41, the white mafia boss had built an empire by noticing what other men missed. A trembling hand. A delayed answer. The single drop of sweat on a man's temple when he swore he was telling the truth. Adrian believed every betrayal left a mark. He simply did not know that tonight, betrayal would hide inside a translation. Across the table, Viktor Sokolov spoke rapidly in Russian. His gray eyes remained fixed on Adrian. Nolan Pierce stood at Adrian's right shoulder, immaculate in a navy suit, listening with the relaxed confidence of a man who had translated Adrian's most dangerous conversations for 6 years. Near the far end of the table, Zora Bennett silently replaced an empty water glass. The black Maid moved with practiced invisibility. Quiet shoes. Lowered eyes. A silver tray balanced against one palm. Most men in the room had stopped noticing her months ago. Viktor leaned forward. Восточный склад будет пуст к полуночи. Его охрана не переживет первые 10 минут. Zora's fingers stopped against the crystal stem. Half a second. Nothing more. Nolan smiled politely. Mr. Sokolov says the eastern warehouse will be ready for inspection by midnight. Adrian nodded once. Zora did not breathe. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Zora. She lowered her eyes and lifted the empty glass onto her tray. Her face remained calm. Inside, every instinct she had spent 3 years burying had just awakened. Nolan's translation was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not professionally imperfect. Viktor had said the eastern warehouse would be empty by midnight. He had said Adrian's guards would not survive the first 10 minutes. Zora stepped backward. The heel of her shoe nearly touched the leg of a chair. She corrected herself before anyone noticed. Anyone except Nolan. His eyes moved toward her. Briefly, Zora continued walking. She had learned long ago that powerful rooms were safest when people believed you understood nothing. Adrian asked a question about delivery routes. Nolan translated it into Russian. Viktor answered. This time, Zora listened more carefully. 14 dok точks. Dock 14. Dock 40. Nolan told Adrian. Zora felt cold move across her shoulders. Viktor continued. 3 тела будут проблемой точks. 3 bodies will be a problem. Nolan barely paused. He says 3 vehicles may cause a problem. The rain struck harder against the glass. Zora reached the sideboard and placed the tray down. Slowly, carefully, crystal touched silver without a sound. 3 lies. In less than 4 minutes. Adrian leaned back in his chair, completely calm. He trusted Nolan. Zora could see it in the way he never checked the man's face after a translation. In Adrian DeLuca's world, trust was rare. But once given, it became a locked door. Nolan Pierce had been standing behind that door for 6 years. And tonight, Zora realized he had been quietly opening it for someone else. Viktor spoke again. Nolan translated. Adrian listened. Zora looked toward the rain-darkened window. Nolan's reflection was visible in the glass. So was hers. His eyes were not on Viktor. They were on her. Zora froze. Nolan smiled. A small smile. Almost friendly. Then he turned back to Adrian. Zora lowered her gaze. Her heartbeat struck against her ribs. She understood the message without translation. Nolan Pierce knew she had heard something. He simply did not know how much she understood. Adrian DeLuca trusted the man translating every word. He never imagined the woman clearing his table understood the words Nolan chose to bury. And before the night was over, Zora Bennett would have to decide whether staying invisible was worth watching a man walk willingly into his own betrayal. By morning, Zora Bennett had convinced herself that silence was still a choice. By noon, she understood it had become a weapon in someone else's hand. The DeLuca estate moved through its usual rhythm beneath a pale Boston sky. Security guards changed shifts at the iron gates. Black cars crossed the circular drive. Somewhere in the West Wing, Adrian held meetings behind doors thick enough to bury secrets. Zora polished silver in the dining room where Nolan Pierce had lied 7 hours earlier. Dock 14. 3 bodies. 10 minutes. The Russian words repeated inside her head with perfect clarity. She pressed a cloth against a silver serving tray until her reflection appeared in the metal. Calm face. Dark eyes. Nothing visible. She had become good at that. Footsteps entered behind her. Zora did not turn. You missed a spot. Nolan's voice was warm, almost amused. Zora moved the cloth across the tray. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Your Russian is excellent. Her hand stopped. Nolan smiled at her reflection. Zora slowly turned. I'm sorry. The tea last night. He stepped closer. Russian caravan. You placed it beside Sokolov before he asked. I serve guests. Of course. Nolan adjusted one silver cuff link. And when Victor said Dock 14, you looked at the eastern window. Zora's heartbeat accelerated. Her expression did not. I don't remember that. No. No, sir. Nolan studied her. 6 years beside Adrian DeLuca had taught him the same skill Adrian valued most. Watch the pause before the answer. Zora had not paused. Nolan's smile faded slightly. Good. He walked toward the doorway, then stopped. People who work in houses like this survive because they understand boundaries. Zora looked at the tray. I understand my work. I'm sure you do. He left. Only when his footsteps disappeared did Zora release the breath trapped in her lungs. She looked down. Beside the polishing cloth lay a folded white napkin she had not placed there. Zora opened it. A small piece of paper rested inside. 3 words. You heard nothing. The room seemed to narrow around her. 3 years disappeared. She was 28 again, standing inside a glass conference room in Washington, holding corrected transcripts while men in expensive suits told her she had misunderstood her own language notes. She remembered the investigation, the accusations, the emails that stopped receiving answers. She remembered learning that truth did not always protect the person carrying it. Sometimes it simply made them easier to identify. Zora folded the note. Is there a problem? Adrian's voice came from behind her. She turned too quickly. The white Mafia Boss stood near the doorway in a charcoal suit, one hand inside his pocket. His dark eyes moved from her face to the paper in her fingers. Adrian DeLuca noticed everything. That was what people said. Zora wondered if he noticed fear when it belonged to a maid. No, sir. Adrian did not move. You look like someone just threatened you. Zora's fingers closed around the note. Through the open doorway behind Adrian, Nolan appeared at the far end of the corridor. He stopped, watching. Zora looked at him, then back at Adrian. This was the moment. For words could change everything. Your translator is lying. Her mouth opened. Nothing came. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Zora. It's nothing, Mr. DeLuca. Nolan continued walking. Adrian watched her for another second, then nodded. Very well. He left. Zora remained beside the silver tray, the warning crushed inside her palm. She had been given one clean chance to tell the truth, and she had chosen the silence that once kept her alive. But somewhere upstairs, Adrian DeLuca was preparing another meeting with Victor Sokolov. Nolan Pierce was preparing another translation. And Zora Bennett had not yet understood the cruelest thing about betrayal. The first lie creates danger. The second lie creates a pattern. But silence gives the liar permission to continue. The second time Zora Bennett heard Nolan Pierce lie, the lie had a destination. Harbor 9. Midnight. Adrian DeLuca's life. The meeting began at 6 beneath the amber lights of the private library, where shelves of dark leather books climbed toward a painted ceiling and 2 armed guards waited beyond the closed doors. Adrian sat behind a broad mahogany desk. Victor Sokolov appeared on a secure screen mounted above the fireplace. Nolan stood beside Adrian. Zora entered carrying coffee. Invisible again. At least, that was what she needed Nolan to believe. Victor spoke in Russian. Pierce подтвердил, что DeLuca лично будет в гавани. Zora's stomach tightened. Pierce confirmed DeLuca will be at the harbor himself. Nolan waited half a second. Mr. Sokolov. Request your personal attendance at the harbor as a gesture of respect. Adrian lifted his coffee. Tell him I'll consider it. Nolan translated. Victor smiled. Zora set the silver pot beside Adrian's cup. Her hand remained steady until Victor continued. Без DeLuca сделка бесполезна. Он должен быть там до полуночи. Without DeLuca, the deal is useless. He must be there before midnight. Nolan's voice remained smooth. He says the agreement would carry greater weight if you arrived before midnight. Zora touched the coffee pot to the saucer. Clink. A tiny sound. Adrian looked at her. Nolan did too. Zora lowered her eyes. My apologies, sir. Adrian said nothing. Victor continued speaking. Names. Vehicles. A northern entrance. Nolan softened every dangerous word before handing it to Adrian in English. Men became associates. Surveillance became preparation. Isolation became privacy. Zora listened as one reality entered Nolan Pierce's ears and another left his mouth. Then Victor said something that turned her blood cold. Когда его охрана разделится, у нас будет 7 минут. When his guards separate, we'll have 7 minutes. Nolan smiled. Mr. Sokolov says his people can complete the transfer within 7 minutes. Adrian leaned back. Efficient. Zora stared at the dark surface of the coffee. She could see Adrian's reflection inside the cup. Calm. Unaware. Powerful men often believed danger would announce itself loudly. A gunshot. A broken window. A car following too closely. But sometimes danger wore a navy suit and stood 3 feet away, translating your murder into good business. Grant, Adrian said. The library door opened. Grant Mercer entered. Prepare the harbor team. I want 12 men. 2 vehicles. We leave at 11:15. Zora's breath caught. Nolan turned his head slightly. His eyes found hers. He knew. She saw it now. Not suspicion. Certainty. The meeting ended 8 minutes later. Victor disappeared from the screen. Grant left to prepare security. Adrian signed 2 documents without looking up. Nolan collected his notes. Zora reached for the empty coffee cup. Zora. She stopped. Adrian looked at her. Your hand. She looked down. Her fingers were trembling. Zora immediately placed them against the tray. Too much coffee, sir. Adrian studied her. Nolan smiled from across the room. Perhaps she should rest. Zora looked at him. His voice sounded kind. That made it worse. Adrian returned to the documents. Take the evening. Thank you, sir. Zora left the library. She walked normally until the door closed. Then faster. Down the corridor. Past the kitchen. Into the small service room beneath the eastern staircase. She locked the door and pressed both hands against the sink. Midnight. Harbor 9. 7 minutes. Zora stared at herself in the narrow mirror. 3 years ago, she had spoken the truth and lost her career. Yesterday, she had stayed silent and kept her job. Tonight, silence had changed its price. Adrian DeLuca was preparing to walk into a harbor because Nolan Pierce had translated a trap as respect. Zora opened the cabinet beneath the sink and removed a small notepad. Her hand shook as she wrote one Russian sentence. Then the exact English translation beneath it. Footsteps stopped outside the service room. Zora froze. The handle moved once. Locked. Nolan's voice came through the door. You should have listened to my note. Zora looked at the words in her hand. For the first time in 3 years, fear and truth stood in the same room with her. This time, only one of them was leaving in silence. The door handle stopped moving, but Nolan Pierce did not walk away. Zora Bennett stood inside the service room with one hand over the note and the other gripping the edge of the sink. Beyond the thin wooden door, silence became heavier than footsteps. Open the door, Zora. Nolan's voice was gentle. She hated that gentleness. I'm changing, Mr. Pierce. A pause. In a service room? Zora looked around. Cleaning bottles. Folded linens. A narrow mirror. No second exit. I spilled coffee on my uniform. Nolan said nothing for 3 seconds. Then his shoes moved away. Zora waited until she could no longer hear them. She unlocked the door. The corridor was empty. At 11:12, the mansion's front hall filled with men in dark coats. Grant Mercer checked radios while drivers waited beneath the portico. Rain covered the armored cars in silver. Adrian descended the staircase wearing a black overcoat. Nolan followed him. Zora stood near the entrance holding Adrian's gloves. Her heart struck hard against her ribs. 3 minutes. That was all she had. Nolan's eyes found her immediately. Zora walked toward Adrian. Your gloves, sir. Adrian extended one hand. She placed them in his palm. And your coat collar is folded. Adrian frowned. Is it? Yes, sir. It wasn't. Zora stepped closer. Every guard in the foyer noticed. Maids did not adjust Adrian DeLuca's clothing unless asked. Nolan noticed most of all. Zora lifted both hands toward Adrian's collar. Her fingers brushed the black wool. Adrian's body became still. Zora. One moment, sir. She straightened fabric that was already straight. Then her right hand moved inside the edge of his coat. The folded note disappeared into his inner pocket. Adrian caught her wrist. Fast. Controlled. The foyer went silent. Grant looked over. Nolan stopped breathing. Adrian stared at Zora. What are you doing? His voice was quiet. Dangerous. Zora could feel his fingers around her wrist. She looked directly into his dark eyes. Don't let him translate this. Adrian's expression did not change. Zora stepped back. He released her. Nolan approached. Is there a problem? Adrian looked at him. Then at Zora. Apparently my collar offended her. A few guards smiled. Nolan did not. Adrian walked outside. Zora remained beneath the chandelier as the cars disappeared through the iron gates. She had done it. Now she had no idea whether she had saved him or simply told Nolan exactly where to aim next. 10 minutes later, Adrian sat in the rear of the lead SUV while Boston lights moved across the rain-dark windows. Nolan occupied the passenger seat. Grant drove. Adrian reached inside his coat. His fingers touched paper. He unfolded the note beneath the dim interior light. One Russian sentence. Pierce подтвердил, что DeLuca лично будет в гавани. Beneath it, Zora had written, Pierce confirmed DeLuca will be at the harbor himself. Adrian read the line twice. His face remained calm. Everything all right? Nolan asked from the front. Adrian folded. The note. Fine. We should reach Harbor 9 by 11:40. Adrian looked at Nolan's reflection in the windshield. 6 years. Moscow. Prague. 3 negotiations in New York. Nolan had translated threats, apologies, promises, and last words. Adrian had trusted him with language because language was the only weapon Adrian could not personally inspect. Grant, Adrian said. Take the next exit. Nolan turned. The harbor is straight ahead. Adrian looked out the window. I know. Victor is expecting us. Then he can practice disappointment. Grant took the exit. Nolan's jaw tightened for less than a second. Adrian saw it. For the first time in 6 years, he saw it. The SUV turned back toward the estate. Adrian placed Zora's note inside his pocket. He did not know whether the black maid had told him the truth. Not yet. But Adrian DeLuca had survived 41 years by understanding one rule. Never accuse a traitor before you know how deeply the betrayal runs. By midnight, Nolan Pierce believed the harbor meeting had simply been canceled. Adrian knew better. The meeting had only moved. And this time, Nolan would not be the only person in the room who understood every word. At 12:17, Adrian DeLuca returned to his estate without announcing that he had almost walked into a trap. The rain had weakened to a cold mist, leaving the mansion windows dark and reflective. Nolan Pierce entered behind him, composed again. I'll contact Victor in the morning, Nolan said. Adrian removed his gloves. No, Nolan paused. No. Contact him now. Grant Mercer looked toward Adrian. Nolan gave a small laugh. It's after midnight in Boston. Victor isn't in Boston. Adrian handed his coat to a guard. The folded note remained in his pocket. Set up the secure call in the library. Nolan's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. Of course. 15 minutes later, the library lights burned low. Adrian sat facing the secure screen. Nolan stood at his usual position. Grant remained beside the door. One chair had been placed near the sideboard. Empty. Nolan noticed it. Are we expecting someone? Yes. The door opened. Zora Bennett entered carrying a silver tray. Her uniform was immaculate. Her face was not. Fear lived behind her eyes, carefully controlled. Nolan turned toward her. For the first time, his calm disappeared. Why is she here? Adrian looked at him. Coffee. At 12:30? You suddenly dislike coffee? Nolan smiled. Not at all. Zora crossed the room. Adrian did not acknowledge her. She placed the tray on the sideboard and stood beside it. Victor appeared on the screen moments later, irritated and awake. He began speaking Russian immediately. Nolan listened. Mr. Sokolov says he is disappointed the harbor meeting was canceled. Zora's index finger touched the silver tray. Tap. Adrian heard it. Victor continued. Он хочет знать, кто предупредил DeLuca. Nolan translated. He wants to know whether security concerns caused the change. Tap. Adrian remained motionless. Victor leaned closer to the camera. Pierce обещал, что DeLuca ничего не узнает. Nolan's jaw tightened. He says future arrangements must remain confidential. Tap. Zora stared at the floor. Adrian watched her reflection in the dark window behind the screen. Victor spoke for 6 minutes. Each time Nolan changed the meaning, Zora's finger moved. Tap. A promise became a question. Tap. A warning became a greeting. Tap. The name Pierce disappeared entirely from one sentence. Tap. 7 times. 7 quiet sounds against silver. When Victor finished, Adrian ended the call without explanation. The screen went black. Nolan closed his notebook. An unfortunate misunderstanding. Adrian looked toward the window. Zora. Her eyes lifted. Nolan turned slowly. Adrian asked one question. How many? Silence filled the library. Zora's throat tightened. Nolan stared at her. Grant looked between them. Mr. DeLuca, Nolan began. Adrian raised one finger. Nolan stopped. Zora looked at the silver tray. 3 years of fear stood behind her. A ruined career. Closed doors. Men telling her she had heard incorrectly. Her own voice becoming something she no longer trusted. Then she remembered the harbor. 7 minutes. Adrian walking toward men who expected him to die. Zora raised her head. 7 lies, sir. The room went silent. Nolan laughed once. This is absurd. Adrian did. Not look at him. Translate the third statement. Zora answered immediately. Mr. Sokolov said. Pierce promised DeLuca would learn nothing. Nolan's face changed. She's guessing. The 5th. He said the northern entrance would remain unguarded because you were expected to divide your security team. Adrian's eyes hardened. The 7th. Zora looked directly at Nolan. He asked whether Mr. Pierce had received the second payment. Nolan stopped breathing. Grant's hand moved toward his radio. Adrian leaned back in his chair. No anger. No raised voice. That frightened Nolan more. 6 years, Adrian said quietly. Nolan stepped forward. Adrian, listen to me. I have been listening to you. Adrian's gaze shifted toward Zora. That appears to be the problem. Nolan looked at the black maid he had threatened in a service room. For months, he had passed her in corridors without remembering her name. Now every man in the library was waiting for her next sentence. Adrian placed both hands on the desk. Translate the entire call again. Zora hesitated. Exactly. Adrian looked at Nolan. Exactly. And for the first time in years, Nolan Pierce was forced to stand silently while the woman he had considered invisible gave Adrian DeLuca back every truth he had stolen. Truth sounded different when Zora Bennett spoke it. There was no performance in her voice. No attempt to impress the powerful men watching her. She simply stood beside the silver tray and rebuilt the conversation Nolan Pierce had spent 6 years teaching Adrian DeLuca to misunderstand. Sentence by sentence. Word by word. When Victor had mentioned payment, Zora translated payment. When he had mentioned unguarded entrances, she said unguarded entrances. When he had said Adrian's name beside the word death, she did not soften it into business. 20 minutes passed. Nolan remained near the desk, watched by Grant Mercer. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume. Adrian said nothing until Zora finished. That's all, sir. Adrian looked at the handwritten notes before him. Adrian noticed. Georgetown. Nolan laughed quietly. Convenient. Grant looked at him. Nolan lifted both hands. We're accepting the word of a maid because she claims she studied at Georgetown? Zora's eyes lowered. The old instinct returned immediately. Become smaller. Let the room move past you. Adrian watched the change happen. What did you study, he asked. Linguistics. And Zora swallowed. Interpretation. The library became still. Adrian leaned forward. You were an interpreter. A junior interpreter. For whom? Zora looked toward the dark window. Her reflection stood beside Nolan's. 3 years ago, she had worn a gray suit instead of a maid's uniform. She had carried transcripts instead of trays. A logistics firm in Washington. What happened? Nolan interrupted. Adrian, this is irrelevant. Adrian turned his head. You have translated your last sentence in this house, Nolan. Nolan went silent. Adrian looked back at Zora. What happened? She took a breath. I found altered translations in a contract investigation. Russian shipping records were being changed before the English transcripts reached the legal team. Grant's expression sharpened. You reported it? Yes. And Zora gave a small smile without warmth. The senior interpreter said I had misunderstood the dialect. Management believed him. Adrian stared at her. You had proof? I thought I did. Thought. By the time anyone asked for the recordings, they were gone. My access log showed files I never opened. Emails appeared under my account. Nolan's face remained still, but Adrian saw something in it. Recognition. Not of Zora. Of the method. They blamed you, Adrian said. They didn't have to blame me publicly. Zora's voice softened. They only had to make me difficult to hire. The room fell quiet. 6 months later, I stopped applying. Adrian looked at her uniform. The white collar. The black apron. The hands she kept folded in front of her. For colder than anger. Recognition. He had not threatened Zora. He had not insulted her. He had simply never considered asking. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? Adrian asked. Zora met his eyes. Because powerful men believe the translator before. Nolan looked away. Zora continued. I learned what happens to women who interrupt. Adrian said nothing. The words landed without accusation, which made them heavier. Grant stared at the floor. Nolan shifted his weight. Adrian looked at the note Zora had hidden inside his coat. You still interrupted tonight. The harbor changed the risk. To me? To your guards too. Adrian studied her. Zora had risked her job to warn a man she barely knew and men whose names she did not know at all. She had not asked for money, protection, a position. She had asked only that he read before Nolan translated. Adrian stood. Nolan tensed. Grant, Adrian said. Take Mr. Pierce to the east guest room. No phone. No computer. 2 men outside. Nolan stepped forward. You cannot seriously trust her. Adrian looked at him. I don't. Zora's face changed slightly. Adrian continued. Not yet. He picked up the 7 pages of translated notes. Trust is what created this problem. Then he looked at Zora. Tomorrow, we verify every word. Zora nodded. Yes, sir. Adrian walked past her, then stopped. And Zora. She turned. Tomorrow, don't bring the tray. For a moment, she did not understand. Adrian looked at the silver surface where her finger had tapped 7 warnings into the room. Bring your voice. He left the library. Zora remained still. 3 years ago, the truth had cost her everything. Tonight, for the first time, someone powerful had not asked her to make it quieter. By 9 the next morning, the maid's uniform was gone. Zora Bennett stood outside Adrian DeLuca's library wearing a simple gray blouse and black trousers borrowed from clothes she kept in the staff quarters. Nothing expensive, nothing designed to command attention. Yet when Grant Mercer opened the door, every man inside looked at her. Adrian sat behind the desk. 3 laptops glowed across the mahogany surface. Printed transcripts covered the table. 2 security analysts waited near the fireplace. Nolan Pierce was absent. Sit, Adrian said. Zora looked at the chair opposite him. Yesterday, she would have cleaned around it. Today, Adrian was asking her to occupy it. She sat. Adrian slid a headset across the desk. We recovered 12 recorded calls from the last 6 months. Zora touched the headset, but did not lift it. You want me to translate them? I want you to tell me what was actually said. Zora looked at the stacks of paper. And if my translation contradicts Mr. Pierce's records? Adrian's eyes remained steady. Then the records become evidence. The first recording began at 9:12. By 9:30, Zora had identified 4 altered phrases. By 10:15, 11. Nolan had changed shipping dates, payment amounts, and security arrangements. Sometimes the changes were small enough to appear harmless. A Tuesday became Thursday. 6 men became 4. A question became an agreement. Adrian watched the pattern emerge across the documents like blood spreading through white cloth. At 11:43, Zora removed the headset. Play the call from March 17th again. One analyst restarted the audio. Victor's voice filled the library. Zora listened. Once. Twice. Her eyes narrowed. Stop. Adrian looked up. What? Zora reached for Nolan's transcript. This word here. He translated it as warehouse. And it doesn't mean warehouse. She took a pen. In this context, it means archive. Grant stepped closer. Adrian's expression changed. What archive? Zora listened again. A financial archive. Victor says, once Pierce delivers the archive, DeLuca loses his protection. Silence. Adrian turned toward Grant. The Zurich ledger. Grant's face drained of color. The ledger contained names, accounts, debts, and agreements powerful enough to destroy men who believed themselves untouchable. Only 4 people knew where the encrypted archive was stored. Adrian, Grant, the attorney who created it, and Nolan Pierce, who had translated the Swiss security instructions. Adrian stood. Check the vault. Grant left immediately. Zora remained seated. She could hear the clock above the fireplace. 11 seconds later. Grant's voice came through Adrian's phone. The archive drive is gone. Adrian closed his eyes. Just once. When he opened them, the room felt colder. Lock the estate. Security moved instantly. Doors closed. Radios activated. Cars blocked the gates. Adrian looked at Zora. You heard that from one word. One wrong word, she corrected. Adrian stared at her. For 6 years, Nolan had stood beside him wearing trust like armor. For 11 months, Zora had moved behind him carrying trays. Adrian had believed power was knowing who deserved a seat at his table. He was beginning to understand that arrogance had made him blind to the people standing around it. The library door opened. Grant entered with 2 guards. Nolan walked between them. His tie was gone. His face remained calm. "This has gone far enough," Nolan said. Adrian placed the March transcript on the desk. "Where is the Zurich archive?" Nolan stopped. Zora watched his eyes. They moved toward the paper, then toward her. She mistranslated it. Zora said nothing. Nolan smiled. Russian has contextual ambiguity. She knows that. Adrian looked at Zora. "Does it? Sometimes." Nolan's smile widened. Zora continued. "Not in that sentence." The smile disappeared. Adrian pressed a button. Victor's recorded voice filled the room. Nolan listened. Adrian stopped the audio. "Translate it." Nolan remained silent. "Translate it," Adrian repeated. Nolan looked at Zora. She held his gaze. Her eyes steady. Adrian waited. The analysts waited. Grant waited. No one moved. Finally, Nolan whispered, "Once Pierce delivers the archive, DeLuca loses his protection." The room went silent. Adrian leaned back. "Thank you." Nolan's face hardened. "For what?" Adrian looked toward Zora. "For confirming her translation." And in that moment, Nolan Pierce understood the truth he had spent years hiding from everyone else. The Black Maid had not destroyed him with accusations. She had simply placed the truth in the center of the room and waited for him to translate his own betrayal. By sunset, Nolan Pierce had lost the one thing he had protected more carefully than his freedom: control. Adrian DeLuca stood in the center of the library while Grant Mercer placed a small black drive on the desk. "Found it in Pierce's apartment," Grant said, "inside the lining of a travel case." Nolan sat across the room with 2 guards behind him. His face had become pale beneath the amber light. Zora Bennett remained near the window, not beside a tray, not behind a chair. Adrian had asked her to stay. "The archive is encrypted," Grant continued. "Nothing appears copied, but the technical team is verifying it." Adrian nodded. "And Victor?" "His people abandoned Harbor 9 before dawn." Nolan finally spoke. "Then you have nothing." Adrian turned toward him. Nolan leaned forward. "No attack. No bodies. No stolen data. You have a mistranslation from a woman who admitted she lost her previous job over translation errors." Zora's face tightened. Nolan saw it and continued. "Ask yourself why no one hired her, Adrian. Georgetown education, Russian fluency, interpretation training, and she ends up cleaning your dining room." "Enough," Grant said. Nolan smiled. "No. She wanted someone powerful to believe her. She found you." Zora stared at the rain beginning against the windows. The words were different, but the wound was familiar. Difficult, unreliable, emotional. Every label once used to make her evidence sound smaller. Adrian watched her retreat without moving. Her shoulders folded slightly. Her eyes lowered. Nolan had found the old scar and pressed directly against it. "Zora," Adrian said. She looked at him. "Did you alter the recordings?" "No." "Did you steal the archive?" "No." "Did you tell me to go to Harbor 9? "No." Adrian turned toward Nolan. "Then your argument is unusually weak for a man who built his career on words." Nolan's smile vanished. Adrian walked to the desk and picked up the black drive. "You think this is about whether I trust Zora, isn't it?" "No." Adrian placed the drive beside Nolan's transcript. "It's about evidence." One security analyst activated the largest screen. A timeline appeared. Nolan's access records. Private transfers. Encrypted messages. Dates matching the altered translations Zora had identified. Adrian pointed toward a payment routed through a shell company in Cyprus. March 18th. One day after the archive conversation. Another line appeared. May 2nd. 48 hours after you changed 6 guards to 4. Then another. Last week. The second payment Victor mentioned. Nolan stared at the screen. The room went silent. "Zora did not create these records," Adrian said. "She taught us where to look." Nolan's breathing changed. Adrian noticed. 6 years, Nolan whispered. "I gave you 6 years. You sold me 6 years. I protected you. You edited reality and charged both sides." Nolan stood suddenly. The guards moved forward. Adrian raised one hand. They stopped. Nolan looked at Zora. Hatred sharpened his face. "You think he respects you now?" Zora did not answer. "You're useful today," Nolan said. "Tomorrow, you'll be carrying coffee again." The words remained in the air. Adrian looked at Zora. For the first time, she did not lower her eyes. She walked away from the window. Slowly, Nolan watched her approach. Maybe, Zora said. Her voice was calm. There's nothing shameful about carrying coffee. Nolan blinked. Zora stopped several feet from him. The shame is believing the person carrying it cannot hear you lie. Silence. Grant looked toward the floor, hiding the smallest smile. Adrian remained motionless. Nolan opened his mouth. No words came. Zora's eyes stayed steady. 3 years ago, she had begged men to believe her. She had explained, defended, repeated herself until her own voice sounded desperate. Tonight, she did none of those things. The evidence was on the screen. The truth required no performance. Adrian nodded toward the guards. Take him. Nolan resisted for half a second, then stopped. As he passed Zora, he whispered, This house will forget you. Zora looked ahead. You did. The guards let him out. The library door closed. No one spoke. Adrian stared at the empty chair Nolan had occupied for 6 years. Then he looked at Zora Bennett. He was wrong about one thing. Zora waited. Adrian moved the silver tray from the sideboard and placed it inside a cabinet. Tomorrow, you are not carrying coffee. He closed the cabinet door. Tomorrow, you sit at the table. Zora stood beneath the amber light, silent. For years, powerful people had decided whether her voice deserved to exist in the room. Adrian DeLuca had finally understood something his empire had never taught him. Respect was not giving a voiceless person a voice. Zora had always possessed one. Respect was finally becoming quiet enough to hear it. 3 months later, the same black walnut table held another negotiation, but the woman at Adrian DeLuca's right hand was no longer carrying a silver tray. Zora Bennett wore a navy suit, simple gold earrings, and the calm expression of someone who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Morning light crossed the tall windows of the DeLuca estate. Across the table sat 4 representatives from a European shipping consortium. Their attorneys opened folders. Security waited outside. Adrian sat at the head of the table, silent. One of the visitors, a silver-haired man named Anton Weiss, glanced around the room. Where's your translator? Adrian looked at Zora. You're looking at her. Anton's eyes paused on the black woman beside him. Just half a second. Zora noticed. She had spent years learning to measure half-seconds. Shall we begin? She asked in flawless German. Anton's expression changed. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. The meeting lasted 2 hours. German moved into English. English returned to German. Zora translated contracts, objections, financial terms, and carefully disguised insults without losing a word. She did not soften Adrian. She did not improve him. She gave each side exactly what the other had said. Truth, she had learned, required discipline. Near the end of the negotiation, Anton used an old Bavarian phrase and laughed. His attorney smiled. Adrian looked at Zora. Do I want to know? Zora considered the translation. He said negotiating with you is like teaching a wolf to use a fork. Adrian stared across the table. Anton's smile disappeared. Zora continued. He also said the wolf is learning quickly. Silence. Adrian leaned back. Tell him the wolf prefers knives. Zora translated exactly. Anton laughed. Documents. Adrian remained at the table. Zora closed her notebook. You changed one word, Adrian said. She looked up. Which word? During the insurance clause. Zora's expression tightened. Adrian waited. The German term has 2 legal meanings, she said. I chose the narrower English equivalent because the broader term could imply liability for third-party storage. Adrian studied her. You could have hidden that. Yes. Nolan would have. Zora looked toward the empty chair Nolan Pierce once occupied. I'm not Nolan. No, Adrian's voice softened. You're not. Zora stood. Is that all, Mr. DeLuca? Adrian looked at the chair beside him. Sit. The meeting is over. I'm aware. Zora sat again. Adrian placed a folder in front of her. She opened it. Georgetown correspondence. Letters from the logistics firm in Washington. An independent investigation. Her eyes moved faster. What is this? The company that destroyed your career used the same shell network Nolan used to move payments. Zora stopped breathing. Grant found archived financial records. My attorneys sent them to the federal investigators handling Pierce's case. She turned another page. Her former senior interpreter's name appeared beside 3 transfers. Adrian continued. They reopened the translation fraud investigation. Zora stared at the paper. Why? Because the truth was still true. Her eyes filled. She looked away. Adrian gave her the dignity of pretending not to notice. They offered to correct your employment record, he said. And Georgetown wants you to speak to their interpretation program next spring. Zora laughed once through the tears she could no longer hide. You did all this? No, Adrian looked at her. You did. 3 years ago. Someone finally checked. The room went silent. Zora closed the folder and pressed one hand against it. I don't know what to say. Adrian glanced toward the sideboard. The silver tray was gone. He had ordered it removed months ago. That's unusual for a translator. Zora smiled. Adrian stood. You saved my life without raising your voice. She looked at him. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be loud, Mr. DeLuca. Adrian paused beside her. Chair. No, his eyes moved across the room that had once treated her like furniture. It just needs someone willing to hear it. Zora looked at the black walnut table. Once, she had stood behind it. Then beside it. Now her name rested on a brass plate at Adrian's right hand. Zora Bennett, Director of International Interpretation. Silence had kept her alive. Truth had finally given her voice back. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.